Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in our Ask the Arborist about mature tree care. My name is Michelle Diaz. I'm the Education Program Manager at Trees Atlanta. And our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's forests by planting, conservation, and education. We offer education programs year-round, such as this one. So I invite you to check out our website calendar, treesatlanta.org/calendar, to find out more about this program. I will be your moderator for this class. So I'll be reading the questions through the Q&A and live questions on the chat, and also the questions submitted during the registration. I'll encourage you to use the Q&A and the chat, and so we can have a discussion, and the panelists are going to be answering questions live. After this program, you're going to receive an email. We'd love to hear your feedback about this program and other topics you'd like to learn. And I invite you to also check out our social media and follow us. And our speakers today are Tabitha, our database and research manager at Trees Atlanta, who's also a certified arborist, and Kay Evanovich, who is a certified arborist, tree risk assessment qualified, and the city arborist for the city of Decatur. Welcome both. Thank you for being here.
Hi. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and start with our questions. The first question today will be, what are the general rules about when and how to prune trees in order to make them bushier versus taller?
Okay.
Go ahead, Kate.
Tabitha, I guess I'll try and start this one off. Pruning, really you want to be done sparingly, only to remove like dead branches, crossing and rubbing branches. Fruit trees can be pruned a little differently because they're going to produce fruit based on when and how you prune. There are cuts that you can do that will make trees a little bit bushier. For a lack of a better term, it will make response growth on the limb. But really, to try and explain that on a video is really difficult. And I would say there are lots of pruning classes around where you can learn properly how to prune. And certain trees, you can't really prune them to be a bush. I mean, like I know they do it with crepe myrtles. It's not my favorite thing. I think they're prettier when they're tree formed. But they are one of the trees that respond to certain types of pruning, harsher pruning than other trees would. So, we basically stick with doing a process called crown cleaning, which is just like I said, removing those dead branches and crossing and rubbing branches to get the canopy healthier. I guess it looks more to, at this point, looking what type tree you're putting where to determine how you want it to look. So certain trees are going to be fuller and create more screen. But that would be my answer, sort of in a nutshell. Tabitha?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, if you're trying to make an oak tree a bush, it's just never, you're going to have to prune it all the time, like a bonsai kind of situation. And you don't really want to do that. You really want to follow the structure, the natural structure of the tree. And when we teach pruning, we're really focused on what does the tree look like in maturity? How can we shape it so it's doing the best structure for itself? So as crepe myrtles, you can get more shrubby and they'll survive. But if you let them grow, they're beautiful, like long trees. And you really want to follow that structure. When we do our pruning classes, we're really focused on our street trees and even front yard trees. And so our big focuses are lifting the canopy and making sure, the buses or bikers on the sidewalks or walkers on the sidewalk aren't going to get hit by them. And we do, like Kay said, remove, crossing branches and rubbing branches just to get that structure really nice and strong. The whole point of pruning a young tree is to get it to be a strong, mature tree. So one of the things we also focus on is what is it going to look like when it's older, what's going to be best for it. So we really try to get one central leader on our trees and really establish that strong center, because that's going to be the best, especially for our street trees. The other thing you want to consider too is when a tree, as in almost everything in nature, we don't like to work really hard. So if a tree has access to full sunlight, it's going to be a shrubbier, bushier tree. I think you can come to the Trees Atlanta office and you'll see this really shrubby like beech tree, because it just didn't need to work hard to compete against anything. So it is just this like shrubby little bush. And one of the things we prune for and teach you guys how to prune for is to get it to grow nice and tall, because that in our city, and when we have one tree in the front yard or one tree in the street, that we're always competing, because we want those trees, we want to train them to grow nice and tall and not stay the shrubby, lazy kind of tree that it's going to be, because it's got ample sunlight around it. So we don't typically prune for shrubby small trees, but we do like limit up, get that nice center structure, and clear anything that's going to be a problem later. So those crossing branches, those impacted like crotches are too tight and they'll break and rip, especially if there's like a bus nearby. The other thing to keep in mind when you are pruning, you don't want to go over 25% of the crown of the tree. That could really shock your tree, especially something that is in full sun and it's not typically, it's competing in the forest. You really want to be cautious and not take off too much. That is the nutrient system for the tree. It's how it's going to get its energy. So you don't want to take away the ability to do that. Sometimes it can, especially a crepe myrtle. You'll see they got it because it can survive, but if you do that to a dogwood, you're going to shock it and kill it. So it does really depend on the tree. But you do want to be, we really want to focus on getting them nice and tall, especially in our city environment, get them out of the way so they don't cause issues later down the line.
Correct. Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, the energy, if you prune in winter or fall after the leaves are off the tree, those limbs at the very ends is where the tree stores a lot of energy so that it's able to push leaves out the next year. So if you prune off too much of that, you're going to have an even less shrubby tree because it just doesn't have the energy to push out leaves in the spring. So yeah. I think going to a class is probably the best way to do it, or hiring a professional arborist to come out and see if they can help you out with it.
Yeah, one of the practices we do teach, because our trees are so small, and because if you take off one branch, it could be more than 25% of the tree. We do tip back limbs. That is a really great little tactic for our street trees, just to basically it just tells the tree, hey, we don't want you to grow out anymore. So the bottom branches, if we can't take them all the way off, which we prefer to do, we'll tip them back. And it basically says, okay, tree, put your energies up to the top where you can keep growing out instead of growing out these bottom ones. And you'll see some trees that haven't been pruned and the bottom limbs are extremely long and trying to reach versus the top ones doing what they need to do. So there is a tactic called tipping, but we do have pruning classes throughout the year. It's we have pruning 101, 102, 103. And we teach you all of those tactics in it. And I highly suggest you come and do that with us.
Okay. Yeah, so let's move on into the other question. How about this? So I think this is a very good question. With the frequency of large drop limbs and down trees in Atlanta, who should we look to call? And how often should a resident have trees on their property evaluated to try to catch potential hazards before they happen?
Okay, so good rule of thumb is if you've never had your trees inspected by a certified arborist, it's time. It was time probably 10 years ago, but now is the time to have them checked. It's not that expensive. Usually a certified arborist will come out to your property and do a tree assessment for condition of your trees for anywhere from $125 to $500, depending on the size of the lot and the number of trees you have. But I mean, you get your home inspected before you move in. It's a good idea to have your trees inspected too. That way you can find out, if there is problems, there are treatments that can be applied to trees. You can have an arborist hired or a tree service hired to prune off those dead limbs and do the crown cleaning that I talked about earlier. And then once that's established and you know what condition your trees are in, you do the treatments. Your arborist is also going to probably reference an inspection, a re-inspection. So typically it's a year later if they've noticed conditions and there were things that had to be applied. It may be 6 months if it's something that's time sensitive and they really want to make sure the applications are working. And there may be issues with these larger mature trees where you want to get them checked after every heavy wind event, like the bad thunderstorms that we get that come through with the straight line winds. It's a good idea to, to check them again after that. You can even walk out and look for broken branches on your own, and then contact your arborist if you see anything. Also, street trees that are owned by your municipality or county, counties have arborists, cities have arborists, and you can call them if you notice broken branches or dead branches in the street trees. And with a duty of care, we come out and respond to that and take care of that issue. Tabitha, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, also educate yourself. We have a wonderful program called Tree Keepers that teaches basically how to look at a tree, how to assess a tree, how to prune a tree. So there's pruning classes involved there. What you're looking for with diseases and decay, to signs of issues with trees and pests and what's going on and all those different things that could cause a tree to decline in health. Definitely being able to guard yourself so that you can go out and do those assessments and say, oh, well, there's a huge crack in my tree, or I'm starting to see some black fungus or black like sooty stuff coming off my tree. What's going on? And you can always ask us. We do have a tree care request form online that you can submit, and one of our arborists will come out and look at it. But we do just a visual assessment. But I would say if you wanted a more intense, definitely go to your local arborist companies. We have a recommendation list that we can send you guys for great companies that will come out and do these health assessments. But a visual list, a visual check of your trees is going to be your number one and the easiest thing to do, and less invasive, of course, too. So learning, are there mushrooms? Are there signs of decomposition? Are there a lot of broken branches? Is there a big gaping hole in my tree? What does that mean? It's all about your level and comfort of risk with the tree. So a tree may, survive really long after a lightning strike, but is it going to be the best health? Is it going to cause damage, like high property damage or damage to people or cars? And so it is a level of risk, but that is a great conversation to have with an arborist company or your city arborist to kind of talk about, what are you comfortable with? Our trees do provide a lot of eco benefits of cleaning our air, storing water, cleaning our water, and all of those great things. But, if it's going to potentially be really hazardous, you do want to remove the tree.
Right. And living with trees is living with risk, and as a homeowner, it's how much risk are you willing to accept? And, what kind of condition are your trees in? And Tabitha's right, educate yourself, go out, take a look at your trees. And, if you see those big dead branches, contact a tree company that knows what they're doing. A good rule of thumb to follow, and I'm going to throw this out there, is if you're looking for an arborist, you can always find one by going to treesaregood.org. Mm-hmm. And they have a find an arborist search tool. You just follow the prompts. And also for tree care groups or tree care and tree removal services, there's an industry, the Tree Care Industry Association, TCIA. And you can also look that up. All their members have to have current trainings. They have to have insurance. They have to know what they're doing in order to stay in good membership with that organization. So I always try and encourage people to do that as well.
Yeah, definitely make sure, don't just call up a tree care place and randomly that you see on a truck. You want to make sure that there's an actual arborist, because you can get caught in, oh yeah, that tree needs to come down, and they're just trying to get your tree to be knocked down. So be really cautious about what companies we do. I don't think we have the list. I see that question in the chat. I don't think we have a recommended list on our website, but we can surely send it to you guys, and I'll get that to Michelle to send out later.
Yeah, I'm going to share in the chat from our resource page on our website,
Okay.
some information. And at the bottom of the page, there's the link for the ISA website and the Georgia Association, Arborist Association. And that's where you can find the recommended consulting arborist.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say about this question too, because I think it's poignant, is, get with your neighbors too, and maybe go to these, present the company with, hey, our whole block wants to be assessed, or a couple of these houses along our street want to be assessed, and there might be a way that they could reduce the costs per assessment per year. So if you get close to a company and close to your neighbors, do it as a group and see if they'll do some kind of 4-for-1 kind of deal or something too. I'm sure they're willing to work that out with you guys.
Yeah. All right. So here are more questions. What causes branch dieback on a dogwood? And the tree is 40 years old.
Well, so there can be a myriad of things that would cause tip dieback or dieback on a limb on an existing healthy tree. Lack of water is the first thing I'd look at. And I know you say, okay, we've had a lot of rain. Yeah, but the kind of rains we're getting are not slow, steady soaking rains like we used to get, where they last 2 or 3 days, where it actually has a chance to percolate in. We're getting these fast, heavy rain events where the water runs off. So it really doesn't have a lot of time to soak into the ground. So even though we've had a lot of rainfall, your tree may not have gotten what it needed. So you really need to check your soil right under your mulch. If you've had the tree mulched, move that back and just pick the soil up and squeeze it in your hand. If it just comes apart and it's dry, your tree needs water. Another thing that can affect the trees where they're just losing one limb, there are pests in our area like ambrosia beetle that will get into the branch. They usually leave a little sawdust sticking out that almost looks like a toothpick sticking out of the tree. And that can cause branch dieback. There's twig girdlers. There's a bunch of different things that it could be. But if the limb is already dead, it's probably the better idea to go ahead and prune it off so that it doesn't affect the rest of the tree if it is something that can spread. And again, you can always get your tree checked by an arborist to see what's going on.
Yeah, I would just add to that, trees do have a lifespan, so they may be declining at some point. You can, keep it beautiful by pruning off the dead limbs, but do you realize they're living things and they do have a life, and, it is about the risk. So you can always, depending on what pest it is, you might do some treatments, but then there's the cost benefit of treating a tree that is 40 years old, especially dogwood. So again, can't recommend enough talking to an arborist and getting them out there and getting a treatment plan, especially a certified arborist. Again, look up those companies and make sure they're reparable, because they could, it could be worth prescribing a treatment. It may not be, just depending on the situation. We don't have the photos and we haven't seen the dogwood tree in question. So it's hard for us to go beyond deeper answers, but just look for pests, and it really just depends on what is occurring with that tree.
So now we're moving into other types of trees, the conifer. So how can you guard against fungal diseases, especially on some of the conifers that are native to the drier Western and Northern United States?
Well, let's see, I'll take a bite at this one, and then Tabitha, I'm up for
Yeah.
So realistically, every tree does better at defending itself when it's getting what it needs. So if it's getting the proper water amount, it's especially in these drier climes. And if it's not got mulch in excess and not got mulch trapped up against the trunk of the tree, that makes a huge difference. When we say mulch a tree, we're really talking about not going deeper than 2 inches of mulch, whether it's pine straw or hardwood mulch or pine bark mulch, it really doesn't matter. If you have too much mulch up against the trunk of the tree, it's going to trap moisture on that trunk and create an atmosphere that the funguses thrive on. Keep in mind, these funguses are in the soil. They're there. So trees that have enough nutrient, they don't have too much water, they have the right amount, and they don't have this excess of bark up against the trunk of the tree, usually can defend themselves. And the cedars and evergreens tend to do that a little bit better than the oaks, but there are specific rots to those evergreen trees that's what they seek out. So, again, making sure it's not trapped up against the trunk is critical, and making sure your mulch is never over 2 inches depth. Up in the Midwest and places, I don't know that they even recommend it being that much mulch like we do here in the Piedmont region, where we have such clay soils that we want to try and keep moisture there. Up there, you may have more topsoil and may not need to add mulch. It just really depends, and it really helps to talk to an arborist from your area. And again, I can't stress that website enough. The Trees Are Good, A-R-E, Trees Are Good, one word, treesaregood.org. And you follow the prompts, put in your zip code, and it's going to pull up arborists working, certified arborists that work in your area. And I'll throw it to Tabitha.
Yeah, my biggest recommendation is right tree, right place. So if you're taking a tree from that grows, in California, typically in that drier climate, and you're trying to grow it in wet Piedmont of Georgia, you may always have an issue with it. And that's probably what you're seeing. It's just not adapted. It's not evolved enough to grow here. Why it's not typically here. So you might just always have some issues with it. There are treatment options that you could talk with the arborist company about, what would be good barriers that you could prevent these things from happening. But yeah, our native evergreen trees, our pines and all of our great trees are awesome. And I recommend planting those instead of trying to get, one of the California ones out here. So right tree, right place is what I'm going to say. And
I will agree with that.
Yeah, and if you're seeing issues, it's probably because it's not meant to survive here yet. So I can't stress that enough, that you don't want to plant a tree that is in the wrong place. You don't want to plant a tree that grows typically on the tops of mountains in the bottom of like boggy, because you're going to have the same issue. So just really understanding your trees and understanding where they come from and their natural climate, and planting them in the proper conditions too. Again, we can teach you that. You can always ask Trees Atlanta these kind of questions, depending on the right species, but Tree Keepers is a really great class to learn about that. But the reason you're seeing pests is because of either improper maintenance of the area, like Kay was saying with the mulch, or it's just it's not meant to survive in that area.
Yeah. And be careful about, if you're on vacation and you're hiking or whatever, and you see a seedling, oh, I'm going to take that home. What we don't tend to think about is that seedling may have things that our trees don't know how to defend against, pests and other things. Not to mention that tree won't know how to defend itself against the pests and things that we have here naturally occurring in our soils. So I don't recommend that. If you want to try ordering something from a nursery, you really need to inspect, like she said, where is it? Where can it survive? What zone is that tree made for? We're in a higher zone than they are in the Midwest. So trees are going to get a lot hotter here than they do there, and they just can't survive that kind of thing. So really, really think about that before you do it.
Yeah.
Or just don't do it.
Yeah. I saw my family is from Pennsylvania, and their street tree redbuds are beautiful because it's a colder climate. It's just perfect for them. But if you see our redbuds, it's like they're not that great, and it's just the same situation. It's our redbuds survive really well in our forest setting in the understory canopy, but not as street trees as well. And we try to plant them in our shady spots, but and they're beautiful. We love them. But, if you go up to Pennsylvania, I promise you'll see beautiful red buds. And it is just that situation. We're just planting them, with climate change moving, it's getting hotter here. And those issues are causing these issues in our red buds. Yep.
So talking about diseases, are there any websites where you could upload a photo to help you identify tree diseases such as fungus?
Yeah, there's a couple of different apps actually for your phone that kind of can help you sort of diagnose. But really to know exactly what's going on, again, you would need to contact an arborist. Also, you can use the extension service in your area.
Yeah, you stole it from me. I was going to suggest
Sorry.
it.
I work with them a lot. So yeah, you can always take photographs. You can take a sample, put it in a sealed plastic bag, and contact the extension service, and they will test and tell you what's going on. They even do soils tests, which really you should have done around all your trees to make sure they're getting what they need. It's a simple thing to do. It really doesn't cost that much, and it's really worth it. But yeah, that's one of the best ways. But there are some apps you can load on your phone that kind of will help you identify trees. They can also help identify pests and diseases. There's even a mushroom indicator app, which is really kind of cool. But I wouldn't go by that for like edible mushrooms. I just wouldn't. So this is just as a identifier to let you know it's a Ganoderma mushroom, or it's a honey mushroom, something like that. But yeah, that's what I would throw in on that.
Yeah, there's an app called Picture This, and I think you can do anything from animals to plants to like fungi. So that's a great one. I think you can upload one picture or a couple of pictures a day, and then it kind of locks you out unless you pay for the app. But and then there's always iNaturalist, which is like a crowdsourcing. So essentially you post a picture, and then all of us little like botany nerds are out there trying to identify it for you.
Right.
But I do suggest the UGA Extension Office. It's fairly inexpensive. They are just in UGA in Athens, but I think there's an office in like College Park K that you can go to. I'm pretty sure I dropped off soil samples there before. So
yeah, and there's the DeKalb Extension Service too, and I think Gwinnett has an extension service. Most of the counties have them. So
yeah, but any of our big like universities usually have them too, and it's great because I believe science students in science departments are working and helping out there too. So it's fairly cheaper than. You can always do private testing as well. Arborist companies can do it, but you have these more local governmental and not-for-profit kind of entities helping you too.
So another question submitted live here. Are there some fast-growing trees that you could recommend for planting to replace a line of dead arborvitae for privacy along a property line?
Well,
any fast-growing trees?
Yeah, it's going to depend on what the soils are like, how much light it's getting. Because if the arborvitae didn't survive, then they're not getting what they need, obviously. So that would be something that you might want to take some pictures and send in and consult and see what you can plant there. There are several fast growing tree varieties. I mean, most of the maples are pretty fast, although taller maples I don't think you're going to use for screening. Maybe there's some cedars, but they're not fast growing, so that's the problem. The arborvitae is really fast. The leyland cypresses are extremely fast, but they're having so many problems right now. We're not even recommending planting those.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would do. If an arborvitae didn't survive, and they're pretty hardy, I would want to get a soils test and see what's going on there as to why they didn't survive before I.
Yeah. And remember too, that trees do go through an establishment period. It depends on the type of tree and like how long that period is. But our typical, like our crews, we baby and TLC our trees for 1 to 2 years, essentially watering it every week if we can, every 2 weeks if at very most. And you really do want to give as much effort for that establishment period. And then that tree is just that much healthier later. I like to say to our crews, like by watering it every week or every 2 weeks, it's like giving it a boost of vitamins, like taking one of those emergency packets for your body. It's just helping it out that much more to establish and get strong too. So you really do, you're taking a plant that hasn't grown in the soil, that has no connections and their root systems to other plants around it, and you're throwing it in there, especially our street trees, and you're saying, good luck, survive. And you really do want to TLC, proper pruning, proper mulching, proper watering, mulching and watering. There's so many different methods and products out there, but I promise you, if you just water it and you properly mulch it and you properly plant it, those trees are going to survive. And you really want to focus on that establishment period and make sure that your tree is getting enough water, because it is just working really hard on those roots trying to get them established, and that extra boost can really help them too. And then that might, in turn produce faster growing trees as well, especially if you want to try those arborvitaes again. You try it, soil test, make sure your pH is correct and all your soil nutrients are good for that type of tree, and then try to plant it, but then really do baby it for that establishment period.
Yep, and when you plant matters too. So don't plant in summer. For Decatur and most of the Piedmont, we kind of have a planting window between November 15th and March 1st. If you plant later than that, you're not going to have enough time for root establishment before it gets too hot and too dry. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, especially for understory dogwoods, redbuds, you do not want to plant them after they flower, which is basically February and March. They most likely will not survive with our heat in our summers.
Yep. In fact, I think there's only really one that you can plant in summer that will survive that I'm aware of, and that's magnolia species. So they actually prefer to be planted in the summer. And that would also be a screening tree. But like I said, I would still check out, that you have the proper soils and what did those trees die from and did they get enough water? But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All
Great
right.
questions.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Okay. Is it okay to sod the ground under the canopy as long as you stay 5 feet from the trunk?
No. No, just say no. No, I mean, really, you want to give the tree as much undisturbed, nutrient-rich soil as you can underneath that canopy drip line. So where the last bit of rain falls off the most extended leaves, if you can give that area, especially in our Piedmont region, 2 inches of mulch and make sure it gets plenty of water, you're going to have a gorgeous tree. And let's face it, your sod is not going to live under most trees' canopy. It doesn't get enough light. It's not going to get enough water, and what'll happen is your sod will die or your tree will die. So don't make them compete. When we look at nature, grass and trees don't play well together. Trees perform all kinds of wonderful things like allelopathic chemicals that come out of their leaves or their root systems as they break down to kill off competitors because they don't want grass growing there. Grass wants to be where it can get sun. Under a tree is not where it's going to get sun. So give that back to the tree. There are some low light plants that maybe you can plant in around that if you want to pop a color or, something, and you don't want to have to refresh the mulch all the time, but you really need to leave that, at least the drip line under the canopy, in my opinion, for the tree. Tabitha?
Yeah. And to give a little bit more context too, I mean, if you look out in the woods, and anywhere in like North Georgia and our Piedmont, you won't see grass. And the reason is because of that sunlight availability. A short little lesson is primary succession. Grasses come, then, you got our early species like pines that come, and then our hardwoods develop over that. So if you're trying to put some hardwoods with some grass, it's not how our nature works in this area. It's just not going to survive. But also sod in particular soaks up a ton of water. It's taking all of that water. So if you try to put it over the roots of a tree, your tree might not get water at all. Also, sometimes when you're trying to grow sod in a shady space, you're trying to have it wet. So then you're overwatering it. It's just not a great combination because it's just not how our ecosystem works here. So can you get it to survive? Yeah, probably both of them won't look perfect. You won't have a healthy tree and you won't have healthy grass. So really do recommend growing what we can, which is a nice, beautiful understory layer with under our tree canopies. There's some really great species that grow there. But yeah, it's not, you're not going to get great sod underneath that tree, and you're not going to have a healthy tree when you do that. So if you're okay with both of them looking a little not great and not healthy, sure, try it, but I don't think you're not, it's going to be really hard to balance that combination out for sure.
There goes with ivy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Watch out for ivy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about invasives and weed.
Well, it's my favorite.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, let's say, English ivy and how can it hurt trees, mature trees, as we're talking here?
Yeah. Okay. So English ivy. First of all, the one thing I want to say when I was doing some research in college is English ivy is essentially the same level of density of like concrete over it. And so what happens is it's a perfect environment for rats to burrow under because they have the same protection if they burrow under like a concrete driveway. So I was doing research on rats and I was doing research on English ivy, and I found this like crazy mutualistic relationship where they love each other. So English ivy by your house at all, I mean, you're just inviting rats to be right there. So English ivy, it does take almost all of the nutrients out of the ground. So it's taking up all the water, it's taking up all of your nutrients. And it is really the same thing we were just talking about with the sod. It's just competing too much against that tree. As well, it does have some pretty gnarly like roots and tendrils that come out and dig into like the bark of the tree. And then when it grows up a tree, it is just like, it's not strangling it. I don't know, Kay, if you will say that it will strangle trees. I haven't seen it strangle trees, but what it does do is weigh it down. So it gets super heavy, which is very dangerous with our storms. It can knock them over pretty easily because that tree has whatever extra weight and biomass on it. As well, like in my backyard, I pruned off English ivy in at least 20 trees because it's a slope and it's got a mountain and it's all English ivy as an understory, working on it, trying to remove it. But what I can tell you is I'm not sure exactly how long the English ivy was on this tree, at least probably 10, 20 years since our house was built. But the English ivy ruined the structure of most of the trees here because what the tree is doing is trying to get that much sunlight. But as the English ivy is growing up the tree, it's taking that availability and that niche for the sunlight. So then the branch is getting more and more what we call lion's tail, which is like all the leaves are on the tip. And that's not great structure. That can cause a lot of breaking branches. That can cause the trees to fall and fail. And so it's just not a great idea to have any sort of like ivy, English ivy. There are native vines like Virginia creeper, let it go. Even poison ivy, it's native, it's gonna die back in the fall. It's not gonna like outcompete your tree. It's fine. It's just most people have a reaction to it. When we are removing them, I do want to stress that you want to remove basically eye level down and then about 3 to 5 feet away from the trunk of the tree. But I don't want to see you guys like pulling branches because that can, or trying to pull the vines off the tree, that can pull branches and cause a lot of damage to your tree, but it could injure you or anyone around you. So if you remove it from eye level down, you create enough space and enough gap that as the ivy tries to reach back, and it will try again, I promise you, you can easily remove it again. You don't want to just leave like a foot gap because it can easily just grow right back up and you're just fighting it that much more. If you remove much more of a space, it will take a lot longer to grow back up. And then the ivy will just naturally die in the trees and start to fall off over time. It doesn't look great. You have a spooky Halloween house for a few years, but it's better than trying to pull those branches and those dead vines off, because you could really injure yourself. And that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have anything else to add?
I was going to say you covered just about all of it, but you know what the ivy does is it puts in roots and tendrils as it's growing up the tree into the tree's bark. So the thinner the bark of the tree, the more damage it does to the actual cambium layer of the tree, which is the living tissue. And especially if it's a thin bark tree and you're cutting it and then you try and rip it off before it's dead, it'll actually rip open that bark. So that's why, like Tabitha said, you leave it, once you've cut it, eventually it will turn brown and die and start to fall off. And that's the best way to handle it. But yeah, grinding it around the mulch, the base with a special tool that doesn't grind into the dirt, just grinds the root mass of the ivy is one way you can do it. I've had people hire goats and sheep to eat the stuff, and they both eat different layers of materials. So really, if you can get a mixed herd, from what I've heard, is a better way to go that has some goats and some sheep. It's a natural way to do it. They're also dropping fertilizer as they go. So, but you want to make sure you're not having them eat natives. So there may be plants that are native plants that we don't want to disturb. So you'd really want them to protect that, cage over them, whatever, before you go that route. Same thing with if you end up grinding that stuff, you want to not do the areas where you have natives and do that by hand.
Yeah. And if you're living in a situation like me, where I have a stream down at the bottom of my slope, so I don't want to pull too much of the ivy off, because what that's going to do is take that whole topsoil layer off, and then it's going to cause massive erosion. So what I've been doing for the past year is just every month or so, I'll go out there with the weed whacker and I just cut off all the green of the ivy. And there's still roots. I'm not going to lie. It's probably going to be a few years of combating it, but it's definitely like allowing ferns to grow up and other perennials to grow up, and able to plant, some trees in there and not have to worry about the ivy growing. We've got some pokeweed going on, which I love and just like go crazy. But yeah, so you really, be careful about removing too much. If you have a nice flat area, or if you can replant afterwards, after you remove it, go ahead and pull it up and replenish the soil and get some good nutrients in there, and then plant there. You really want to combat plants with plants, and especially ivy, because there isn't a great chemical treatment for it because of the waxed coat of the leaves. You can't really kill it great with chemicals. Once you do get the old leaves off and the new flush of the green, you can kind of treat it, but I don't recommend it. I do recommend goats or sheep, or pulling it, or just weed whacking it and just kind of combating it slowly. And definitely trying to push it back and bring in more plants to kind of combat with the same type of defense. So.
Yeah. So, and we have a follow-up question. What are some ground covers that are good under trees in this area? And Kate typed the answer: lamb's ear, ice and low light plants. Most of the gray and silver color plants are low light. Just Google shade plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Kay.
I'd be careful in getting something that's going to go with a thick ground cover mass, because then you're going to run into the same problem where the tree's not going to be able to get enough nutrient. That's why I kind of steer away from that, from heavy ground covers under trees. Smaller plants that can be planted around, I think, are a better option. It's not going to affect your tree as much. So.
I think it's the Georgia Native Plant Society. They do plant rescues a lot of times. If you pay for a membership, you can come out and do some plant rescues. I've not done one myself, but I've heard wonderful things about getting those native, like understory, ground layer cover plants. So if you want to learn a lot about them, I recommend going to them and joining on their plant rescues, and I'm sure they'll teach you a ton about all of that.
And I'm sharing a few links here too on how to select an arborist, how to access our pruning classes.
Great.
And the trees are good link.
Yeah. And while Michelle's doing that, I'll say too, you have layers to our forest. So it's really great to plant in that, because that if there is a niche missing, that is where an invasive can come in. So you have a good overstory canopy, and you have a good understory, and you have a good ground layer, and you have the native vines, you're taking up those ecological niches where our invasive shrubs or our invasive vines like wisteria and English ivy have a harder time penetrating. That's why you don't see them in, deep in the forest, because they can't penetrate, but you will see them on like the outside of a forest, that boundary area, because it's been, that forest layer in some sense has been damaged, and those invasives can come in easily. So if you are looking to really have a beautiful yard, you do want to fill in all of those ecological niches of or story all the way down to vines, and let it, bring it in with natives. And the more biodiversity you have, the better your native landscape is to protecting itself from invasives coming in.
So now let's move into mulching. We've covered a little bit about mulching, but let's say, how much mulch should I put on my tree's root area? Okay, and should I use just regular mulch, pine straw, and any good tips for helping a baby tree growing?
Okay. So as far as, what type of mulch to use, the whole idea with mulch is to help biodiversity in the soil as it breaks down. It's adding nutrient and macro and micro nutrients that the trees need. And they'll get a benefit out of no matter what you use. Plus, it helps to keep the ground cooler and holds moisture a little bit longer, which again, trees need the moisture. So whether you're using 2 inches of hardwood mulch, and here in our Piedmont, I would not go deeper than that. Some people recommend 3 or 4, but what we're finding is that amount of rain that we're getting is not soaking through that many layers of mulch. So, and if you have a heavy mulch layer already from the tree, if you haven't been raking away the leaves that I might also break down and make nitrogen, food that is very important for the tree, slowly, then you don't have to add as much mulch if you have a good leaf layer there. Maybe just an inch, just a top dressing. But I wouldn't go deeper than 2 inches on hardwood. I wouldn't go deeper than 3 on pine bark, because it breaks down a little bit faster. And then if you're using pine straw, which a lot of us use, we have so much pine straw here in the state of Georgia with our wonderful pines, you're going to go deeper with that because it breaks down so much faster than the mulches. So you're going to be using 6 inches unfluffed. And you got to watch landscape surfaces, because if you pay for 6 inches of mulch and they're shaking it out so that it's slowly fluffed up and building these layers, it shrinks down to about maybe 2 inches if you're lucky. So that's why I say unfluffed 6 inches if you're using pine straw around your trees. And again, keep the mulch, whatever type you use, off of the trunk of the tree by at least 2 inches. You could even go 3 on a lot of these trees, but 2 is your minimum. You do not want the bark up against the trunk of the tree. And Tabitha, I'm gonna let you handle the young trees.
Yeah, so I would say the difference between a young tree and a mature tree is you do want to focus, don't have the mulch right up on the tree trunk, but you do kind of want to create a berm, which if you come tree planting with us, you will learn within the first 30 seconds of our demo. But you do want to bring the tree berm, the mulch berm back, which is just like a little mound. And essentially what that does is any water, especially if we're watering your trees in the summer, you can kind of pull it towards that trunk. Now, again, you don't want the mulch that way, but you do kind of want no volcanoes, so no like this, but it's more like back here. So you create like a little nice little bowl. So any rain or anything that trickles in, it creates this nice little pool of water for the tree. I will also say that, with mature trees, I wouldn't necessarily think that's necessary. I think you just have a nice space, keep it away from the trunk of the tree, because that's how your funguses grow. The other thing I want to stress is know where your mulch comes from and know where your pine straw comes from. You do want it to be as local as possible. I cannot stress that enough with pine straw. I used to work in Florida with the State Parks Department, and we have a vine called Japanese climbing fern down there. And I see it here in Atlanta now, and we see it in I won't name the company names, but those people that get the pine straw, you'll see the little bits of Japanese climbing fern. And that is something I've worked on it for, like 10 years now. I don't know how to kill, like, I don't know how to get rid of Japanese climbing fern. So I see it more and more around Atlanta. It is emerging invasive that's coming, but it's coming from pine straw. And so if you look up, different areas, know where your pine straw comes from. Japanese climbing fern, we try to source, if we are using pine straw, from our local area, but if not, South Carolina, I believe, does not have Japanese climbing fern. So we try to get it north. Don't get anything from Florida. Florida, I can tell you from experience, it is 100% invaded. So anything you get is going to be have something in there, and you just don't want that in your landscape because you're just going to be combating it. But yeah, watch out for that Japanese climbing fern. It's beautiful. It's just once it's in here, I don't know if we're gonna get rid of it. I think the only thing that works is freeze. Is the only thing I've seen that killed it. But guess what? We're getting less and less freeze, so we're gonna get more and more Japanese climbing fern.
I wonder if you could shoot it with liquid nitrogen as long as you're not putting it into the soil.
We thought about that. But even if it's a fern, so it's spores. So as soon as you try to touch it, like, you can't remove it. So as soon as you touch it, the spores go everywhere, and they're just, you don't really see it, but it's just, you're on your gloves, on you, and you're just spreading it. So it is one of those reasons why we stay local. It's like, don't move firewood from the city to the campground, keep it there. It's the exact same reason. You do not want to spread these things, especially, if you're bringing mulch from an urban environment and maybe you have like a mountain house or something, get the mulch from the mountain house area. There's going to be plenty somewhere around, but you don't want to spread because you can cross-contaminate and you can spread these. And there are rules, if you guys don't know this, there are rules about spreading across jurisdictions about different types of products. We can't really bring it across state lines a lot of the times, but you can look up different rules about moving products around because of pests and diseases being spread. So be really cautious about that. Cannot focus more on getting that local source. And there is, Kate, I'm not sure, or Michelle, if you guys know, there is an app, I believe, that you can call or use that will get you mulch from local companies that they can drop off for you. And I never remembered the name of it.
I'm not sure about the app, but I know that you can call most of the local tree services. They will bring you mulch for free.
Yeah.
They're always looking for a place to dump it. And we want to keep that local, like she said. You definitely don't want to take firewood. You don't want to take mulch because we have certain pests here, like I talked about earlier, that we can transport. That's how we got southern pine beetle here. They watched the ambrosia beetle move down from up north to here from people transporting firewood. So, I know it's a pain if you have a stack you want to take with you, but just don't do it. Buy your wood locally.
Mm-hmm. And there are some dyed mulches out there. They're not necessarily the worst, but again, I just want to stress that you just use your natural stuff. It's I read an article at some point about it not being great for dogs. So I would just suggest not using any extras. Don't use anything fancy. Good old like mulch from your local company is probably the best thing. It breaks down. It's not adding any bad things to the soil like the dye could be. But yeah, local. Source it close by. If you can't, probably north versus getting it from the south. I definitely don't recommend Florida, but there's things that are coming from the north as well. So it's all about the spread of diseases and pests, and we really want to be cognizant of that. But mulch, don't do more than 2 inches. Don't put it near the trunk of the tree. You can really space it out. Give it a nice cover. Don't put your sod right up against that tree either.
Yeah. Oh, something else I want to mention too about mulch. The rubber mulches, they have recycled rubber mulches. Here, that's a really bad idea. In fact, any place that it's hot is a bad idea because it's going to add extra heat load to not only the poor tree's trunk, with reflective heat because it's absorbing it from the sun all day, but it's also baking the root system in the ground below it. Same thing with rocks, decorative rocks. Do the same thing. They superheat and then they're releasing heat all night long. This is not a good thing for your trees. I can't stress that enough. It may look really cool, but it's really bad for your trees. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm all about reduce, reuse, recycle, but yeah, those mulch rubber mulch, not great for our trees.
No, great on playgrounds. Love it for that. Or an area you can't get grass to grow where there's no tree roots. Not under my trees.
There is a product too that I'll say we have used in really high traffic areas called FlexiPave.
Yes.
That's actually pretty great. I mean, you're combating a lot of different things in, downtown or in our midtown area that, it's more beneficial than just mulch, because we would have to add mulch probably every week just to keep them. So there are products, if you are in a high traffic area like Midtown, that your street trees are just getting trampled, or your mulch is never surviving after a storm, where FlexiPave is it's bits of little, I think it is rubber, and then it's suspended in a liquid, but it is pervious, so water can get through it. I've seen people put like concrete around trees, not a great idea. Rocks around trees, not really in our area is that ideal because of what Kay said with the heat. But if you are in a high traffic area, there are some products like FlexiPave that I would actually recommend. But that's about the only product that I would give any voice to.
There's two of those. There's FlexiPave and PerkyPave, I think is the other one. And both of them, yeah, I mean, I've recommended them for driveway applications, things like that, where you're trying to work with a tree and they don't want to lose the tree. So sometimes you got to weigh things out, and when you're using that kind of thing, you're going to need more water, especially when it's hotter. But that's kind of a given for all trees. They need more water when it's hotter.
Yeah, and it's just not getting that natural nutrients too that mulch would break down to, and just give.
You're going to have to do extra stuff for your tree to make sure it's getting what it needs. There are all kinds of products we can blend into the soils, mix into water, pour into the soil, that the tree will get the benefit from, if you can't use a natural mulch because of restrictions. So.
Yeah, and one of the biggest causers of urban tree death is compaction. So that's why you would want also to do mulch or something like FlexiPave, because that soil, as it compacts it, there's less oxygen, less water being able to percolate through. And that can cause a lot of our tree death. So that's why, again, we do want to mulch. If you're, worried about your front yard or something, I would just recommend regular mulch. But those street trees, there are a couple different things, but especially in our downtown settings, we do all the mulching downtown, and we mulch every 3 months because we want to make sure that those trees aren't getting compacted as much as we can. It's Atlanta, it's a downtown setting. They're going to get compacted, but we can extend their life. It's just that much better for the city. So yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Long question, long answer.
I think we had a great conversation here. Thank you both so much. I guess my last question is, how can people can get in touch with you if they have any questions?
Yeah, you can definitely email me. Again, I get all those tree care response forms on our website. So if you send anything there, you're going to get in touch with me in some way. But yeah, my email is just tabitha@treesatlanta.org. Michelle did share it. You can also call Trees Atlanta or call my number. It is on our staff page online. So feel free to reach out with any of those questions. I love talking about trees. I do a lot more data these days. And as much as I love that, I love talking about health of trees and just looking at a forest. So please let me know if you guys have any questions.
Thank you,
Yes.
Tabitha.
Same here. I typed in my email address for all panelists and attendees because it's my name and not everybody can remember how to spell it. But it's kate.evanovich@decaturga.com. And I'm always happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
Yeah. And Kay's got pruning classes just for Decatur citizens too, and look out for all of our classes and education events. It's a great way to get engaged and learn more and more about how to prune, what is even a tree, and like how to look at it. We also have forest stewards for those asking about invasives and how to properly remove them. Those go into much, much greater detail than we can in this 1 hour session. So please join us for any of those classes, and they'll be posted on our website when they're coming up again.
Yeah, we've got a good education portion coming up on the 30th of October, the Walking Past the Dead tree tour at the historic Decatur Cemetery, 299 Bell Street, and it's from 1 to 4. And we welcome everybody. It's a free tour.
Yeah, and I'll say the last thing too is our tree sale is still up online. If at very least, if you want to look up descriptions, we've got some ground cover, we've got some shrub layers, we have, of course, our overstory and understory canopies. So if you're looking for tree descriptions and what to plant and when to plant them, we have a few things still for sale, but at least you can look at all of our descriptions, and we try to combine them for you guys in a nice little format. So you can look there for probably the next week or two. They should be posted, but we do have a perennial sale in the spring that comes up, and you can purchase those little ground cover things that were questioned. So,
and don't forget the front yard tree programs through Trees Atlanta, Decatur, Atlanta, Brookhaven, Sandy Springs, Alpharetta. I think
it's all metro cities these days. It's great.
$5, we plant you a tree in your front yard, and you know, they do maintenance for 2 years. So you know, all you got to do is water. That's the best deal going.
Yeah. They're your free overstory trees.
Well, thank you again, both of you and everybody attending the class. I hope we'll see you around in the upcoming classes. Have a great day.
Sounds good.
Bye, everybody.